Beastcoast Pokemon, welcome back. Today, James Beck and I are going to give you our very first impressions of the brand new mechanic in Scarlet and Violet, Terastallization. Hey guys, Cyber. Relax, I was just gonna get there. Anyway, as this little buddy was saying, 80% of you aren't subscribed to the channel, so hit that subscribe button. It really helps. Hey, what Pokemon are you? Now, one thing to note is that James and I have completed the end game from when we're recording this video. We haven't gotten too much, hands-on experience with it in competitive double/VGC, but we kind of just want to talk about our initial thoughts about it. And even for me, just after playing through the end game, I already have developed more of an opinion than, before we went into Scarlet and Violet. So, James, welcome. I mean, first of all, how do you feel about Tera?
It's definitely an interesting mechanic for sure. The ability to change into a type, even retain stabs. It's definitely a unique mechanic, and it's something that it's very interesting. I've watched a few of my friends play on Discord, and there are a lot of different plays you could potentially make and a lot of different options. And one of the things about Pokemon variants is something where, compared to like Dynamax, for instance, where you pretty much had to, like, you could anticipate most likely when Dynamax was going to occur for most of the game. But in this scenario, like, I don't think it's going to be as centralized where you're clicking max airstream or like really strong moves and just like chaining KOs. But overall, there are definitely some nutty things you can do with this, with the ability to change into any type. So there are definitely a lot of things you can do here and a lot of different plays depending on your Tera type.
Yeah, I think, the inspiration for us making this video is I think I have been scared, and I still am scared after playing through the end game and just seeing some experience with it. I think one big factor, like you said, is kind of the surprise factor. I will say one upside of Tera is I think it makes really any Pokemon viable, very much like Dynamax, where previously Pokemon maybe were just held back because they had really bad stats or really bad typing. Tera fixes, the typing part of that, for example. And so that can be cool. But at the same time, it's like you're going up against 6 Pokemon. Each of those Pokemon can have their own individual Tera type. So in best of 1, it's just absolute pure chaos. I have no idea what the online ladder is going to look like. One thing to note is that, of course, in-person tournaments are best of 3. But even then, with Tera, it's like, like you said, with Dynamax, you at least knew what to expect. With Tera, you really have no idea what type your opponent can be. One thing I'm actually really worried about is how they're going to handle, information distribution in live events, because you can, if you, let's say, gain an advantage and figure out, or one of your friends played your opponent that you're about to play and they know the Tera types, that in itself is such a huge advantage. So I wonder if they're going to consider going to open team sheets, which is a concept that's been explored before, where you essentially see everything about your opponent's team other than their actual EV slash, stats. And so, yeah, I'm still worried for it. And like, I even think about the in-game and I'm like, oh, I know this gym leader has this Tera type, but the AI means that like they just immediately Tera type. But I was like, even if I knew their Tera type, just thinking about whether or not they could do it if that was an actual player, that in itself is really difficult. And so, yeah, I am very curious to see how it'll be handled, because you can't see your opponent's Tera type beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had this concern, I think, ever since the mechanic was revealed. We've talked about it before, but it's just a question. Will we be forced to, for instance, use open team sheets? Will there be an option for us to actually see the types in game, which I think is very possible in a team preview setting? It's definitely implementable, but I don't know if we're actually going to get that in time, or if they're ever going to implement it. So definitely can be scary. I think best of 1 is way too chaotic. I think it's absolutely insane, but I think for a best of 3 setting, I still think it's crazy. Yeah, there's informational advantage, which items were already a pretty big part, especially like Gen 8. I remember like knowing the items can pretty much like determine like what Pokemon is going to Dynamax, for instance, right? In this case, having the types can be a huge thing. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of plays you can make, and it really depends on the Tera type. For instance, I was watching some of my friends play, and one of them was using Torkoal Lilligant, which of course a little bit infamous, but there were a lot of things that they could do. For instance, against a fake out mon, they could turn it to the ghost type, and they avoided the fake out, went for the sleep powder, and yeah, that was already pretty much a game-winning turn. And then I saw another set that they did later where they changed it so it's a grass type Lilligant now, and it O-code one of the mons. So it's like, Oh, great. There's there's quite a bit you have to consider with these possibilities. And I think that's also another thing that's crazy. Difference between Dynamax and Terras is, I think, for instance, the same team. Let's say you have like the same 6 Mons and maybe a few slightly different sets. But for instance, you pretty much knew the items in a lot of cases. Maybe there were a few variances, but for the most part, you pretty much knew what to expect from a team of 6, right? But with Terra types, you could have the same team and have completely different Terra types depending on like what roles that a player prefers. For instance, let's say I have a team with Amoonguss, and something I really want on this Amoonguss is resistance, so I have a fire type Terra on it so I can avoid fire, and ice types being super effective in it so I can get a spore off. And then there are other players who have a ghost type Amoonguss to avoid a fake out potentially so they can get a spore off. And it's like they're both very, very viable, and it's like it's pretty much impossible to tell. So even with assumed information, like even let's say 2 players bring the exact same team to a tournament, you might still have to guess. They could be running completely different Terra types. Like this information you got and could just be irrelevant. So I mean, it's very chaotic what we could receive in the tournament setting.
Yeah, I think one other interesting thing about Terra is, after playing through the in-game itself, I was like, oh wow, like there were a lot of times where my Terra was really bad, like is super ineffective. And you know, one of the key skills of Dynamax and Sword and Shield and the best players was how do you find the perfect position to utilize it. But inherently Dynamax itself, like it just allows a Pokemon to be extra bulky, right? Like getting double your health in itself is such a huge advantage. Whereas with Terra, yeah, you do change your type, but it's still the same amount of HP, right? And so I think that's one thing that's interesting, where I can see a lot of people maybe not utilizing their Terra super well and, you know, changing to a type. I think one other thing to consider is, okay, maybe you do it defensively, but how much value do you get out of, you know, surviving or basically being immune to an attack for a single turn is? Can you actually turn that into a victory? So I think one thing that was really interesting in Dynamax is like if you could hold your Dynamax until after your opponent's was over and you still had enough resources, it would often just give you such a major advantage. With Terra, I'm eager to see, you know, is it the first person that sets the tempo that can immediately just draw so much pressure, or, you know, is it the one that plays a little bit more defensive? I mean, it's not going to be one or the other, right? It's going to be a mix. But point being is, I think, yeah, there's different ways that you can utilize it, whether it be like those offensive options that you listed on turn 1 where you try to just win the game immediately, or you kind of hold out on it and go for it a little bit later. So, I mean, to back up all of your points, I'm eager to play the ladder in the first few weeks to get experience with it, but my intuition is that I think it's going to be crazy, and it sounds like a total mess, honestly. But I guess we'll have to see. I also look at it from like having watched some singles after seeing people play like in the first few weeks, and you know, I'll see people literally pull off like a 1v6 comeback with a crazy Terra. So I don't know. This like, even though it maybe doesn't seem as oppressive as Dynamax, I think just the fact it can be any type for any Pokemon is still wild to me, and I'm afraid.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a bit of singles content where not a super effective hit, a resisted hit, just OHKOs them on anyway, it doesn't even matter. So I think definitely defensive we will see, but I was wondering what you think of where for offensive compared to like having the same type bonus, for instance, like a water type turn into a water type, or do you think just gaining an extra like coverage typing is worth it for Terra? Because I definitely feel like we're probably going to see a lot of offensive Terra types for most of the offensive Pokemon that want to actually do damage. But yeah, what do you think of like which is stronger between same type attack Terras and, you know, gaining another coverage option?
I think it's a really good question. I don't know if there's a clear answer. I will say, while I was playing through the in-game, there were so many times where I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I just had the same type Terra. Like I had a Gyarados and it was electric Terra. And I was like, oh, this coverage is cool. But I was like, I just wish I had more damage to pick up a one-hit KO right now instead of like having an alternate type like covers for something. So yeah, I don't think there's a clear answer. I do think that in this generation, team building is going to be more important than it ever has been, because even just choosing your single Terra type on a single Pokemon makes a dramatic difference, right? And yeah, deciding whether or not you want to use it offensively or defensively is a really big deal. So I imagine the early meta will be more players just trying to figure out how to win the game in the first couple of turns. So I think it will lean more towards offense. But you know, the Lilligant Torkoal example you mentioned, right? Being able to defensively turn Lilligant even just to dodge a single attack can be game changing. And so it's very much dependent on, I think, the strategies that you're trying to build around. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any impressions on that overall?
I think it really depends. I think one of the interesting things is we haven't really talked about, and I don't think I've seen many players talk about it, is Tera Blast, the move you get. So it's basically like an 80 base power hidden power, but the consequence is it's a normal type move until you actually like Terastallize. So one of the things is for this move, I can't really see it unless your team has a dedicated Pokemon where it's like a sweeper for Tera, because otherwise, like, there's so many situations where it's like, I'm gonna have a useless move, so I can't really see it. Like, for instance, with Dynamax, for instance, we had moves like maybe were unoptimal generally, but they were really important for Dynamax, right? And you could have a main Dynamax user. For instance, Dragapult would run Fly, or a lot of Pokemon would run Fly, and it's generally not a good move in competitive, but because Max Airstream was so important, you would still run it anyway, right? Especially since you could say you would most likely commit to you Dynamaxing this Pokemon very often. With Tera, I don't know, unless you're going a really offensive route, where I could say that Tera Blast is really going to be worth it. That's one thing I'm pretty interested in. What kind of usage this move will have. Will it have much at all? Dude, I've seen so many stupid Tera plays already. It's like, come on, man. Like I've seen some crazy stuff with the Amoonguss play as the same thing as Lilligant under Trick Room. And then I've seen like I've seen some smart ones, like turning a Trick Roomon into a grass type just so you avoid the spore. I've seen already like a lot of it, and it's like, are you serious, dude? This is a guessing game at this point. also with Lilligant, you have to, you could also just run that what's that oak thing? And so that's another element too.
Yeah, I agree with you, James. I think that's completely how I'm seeing it as well, where it's so, we often make like the joke about the 4-move syndrome in competitive Pokemon, where it's like, oh, a Pokemon wants so many moves, but it can only run 4, and Tera Blast is just another level on top, right? So I could also see maybe players running Tera kind of like oh, I'm really weak to this one Pokemon. I have this, I don't know, something like Amoonguss, right? But what if I have Amoonguss with Fire Tera to beat like something that's 4x weak to Fire? I don't even know if they're like Scizor, a random example. I don't think that's actually, gonna be something that's relevant, but the point you're seeing here is that, yeah, maybe someone runs a random Tera just to cover for a weak matchup, right? To be honest, even talking about this, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it opens so many options, but it really hurts my head as well. But generally, then it also means you're running freaking Tera Blast on Amoonguss, so you're giving up something like Spore, Giga Drain, Rage Powder, Protect, right? And it's like, I can see some people teching in a move to beat a specific matchup because their team overall, like, they think is super, super well-rounded. And so, yeah. That's like a niche use case, and then a main use case, I agree with you, is like a sweeper. Like, I was thinking about how you could maybe utilize Snow, the brand new weather condition, which is replacing Hail, and I was like, oh, with Snow, like, you could maybe, run Baratic. Baratic gets access to Earthquake now, but what if you had like Terra Ground? You could also have Terra like for another type as well, and have more coverage between like Ice Ground and like a third type, for example. And so, yeah, I think where Terra makes a lot of sense is to just give you further coverage that you otherwise wouldn't get access to for really strong sweepers. I could see some very niche cases with like the Amoonguss example I just described, though. But yeah, ultimately it's all about opportunity cost. And if you're running Tera Blast, it means you're giving up either often what's considered maybe just an objectively better option, or Protect, right? And I think Protect, of course, is going to be better in this metagame overall as well. So we'll have to see, but I think that concludes our overall thoughts, our first impressions on Tera. I think James and I honestly are both pretty worried about it. We're nervous about it for sure. We're going to have to see how the meta shakes up after the first few weeks, after we actually get some, game time with the rule set in VGC, and see how Tera affects it. But yeah, let us know what you think about the mechanic down in the comment section below. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the Beastcoast channel, and we'll see you all next time.